Bom dia, como já ouviram, eu sou Inayaili e apesar do português ser a minha língua materna, a minha apresentação vai ser em inglês. Eu acho que é um bocado mais fácil para mim falar de termos relacionados com o meu trabalho em inglês. Vários termos são um bocado difíceis de traduzir e a maior parte da minha carreira eu estive em Londres. E também eu já dei esta apresentação em uns quantos sítios e preparei sempre tudo em inglês. É um bocado como se alguém vos pedisse para, de repente, cantarem a vossa música preferida que vocês sabem cantar em inglês para cantarem em português, ou vice-versa. Portanto, espero que me perdoem e se houver alguma coisa que não entendam, depois nas perguntas e respostas podemos voltar a falar em português e eu posso tentar responder se houver alguma coisa que seja mais complicada de entender. Okay. So I'm a product designer at a company called Make Us Proud. It's a product design studio based in London. It's near the Barbican, which is a really amazing complex of buildings in London. Right now I'm working on a project with Joyent, who are a San Francisco-based company. They are early contributors to Node.js and they're pioneers in the fields of cloud computing and virtualization. They are early adopters of software containerization technology, and before they were acquired by Samsung last year, they were the largest privately owned cloud provider in the world. We are working with them on a new iteration of the My Joyent portal, which is also called Triton, which is an infrastructure management platform, and we want to bring application management into it, which will include things like deployment of services, versioning, alerting, notifications, and many more things. One of the things that we are developing as part of the work that we're doing with Joyent is a design system that can be used across their set of cloud products. So by having a design system that defines the principles, the design principles, and that gives us a set of design components and guidelines that we should follow, that means that we will be able to create prototypes more quickly and we'll have more time to test things and to iterate on them and make sure that things like the copy, the text, which are very important in a complex product like this one, that all of those things are really well done and that we have time to really craft them properly. Before I was working in Make Us Proud and with Joyent, I used to work at Canonical, which is the company behind the Ubuntu operating system, for many years. I was leading the design of the vanilla framework, which was designed to be used across all of the Canonical websites, like the main Ubuntu.com website and the Canonical website, but also many different types of websites that they have, like lots of different blogs, documentation websites, product websites, and a number of cloud products and applications. So design systems is a term that we've been hearing more and more about everywhere in the past few years. It seems like every large company has one or is in the process of launching one. Everyone is talking about how to create one, what tools to use, how to design the components, what to name them, how to plan everything. But what is exactly design system and why are they a good thing? So as for most things to do with design systems, let's see how this guy called Nathan Curtis defines it. So this is what he says is his 10-second explanation. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds to read it. Okay. And now this 30-second explanation that he also has. Okay, I'm not going to wait 30 seconds. So basically, I think this is generally what most people mean when they say design system. It's a library of visual styles and components. Everything is documented, everything is reusable as code for developers to use and for designers to use. And many times it also includes guidance on accessibility, layout, editorial and branding, data visualization, illustration, UX patterns, and many more things. Although sometimes people, when they say design systems, they're actually just referring to the pattern library. So a list of reusable design components that can many times be just on one page. So the word system comes from the fact that it's a number of pieces that are part of the same thing. A design system is not just a brand style guide or just a pattern library or just a copy style guide. It's everything that combined will help in some way define how you are going to design and develop the product that you are creating. Some of the most popular design systems and style guides that you may have heard of are Lonely Planet's Riso, which is commonly referred to as the holy grail of style guides because of the way that it's been developed so that everything is always in sync. So if a change is made in one place, it's reflected everywhere else. Another one is the Salesforce Lightning Design System, is another popular example. They are particularly well known for their introduction of and use of design tokens, which are the very small particles or entities that make up a design system, like the colors in the color palette, or the font sizes, spacing values, the duration of animations, and other little tiny things like that. They call them design tokens. Also, the BBC Global Experience Language, or GAIL, is one of the very early examples of online style guides and is still a really great resource to learn from. And then, of course, there are Google Material Design, Microsoft's Fluent, IBM's design language that you should also make sure that you are at least aware of. It's really easy to think that whatever project you are working on needs a design system, which may not be the case necessarily, but it's also easy to think that maybe by having one, it means you can be as creative in your work, which also shouldn't be the case. Having a design system is almost like having rules on how you should be driving and having roads to drive on. You can still travel wherever you want. You don't just have to travel on the road, and you don't even have to just travel in the cars. You can just walk, or catch a flight, or a bus, or a horse. So just because there's roads and there's cars and there's rules, it doesn't mean that that's the only way you can do things, but they make it easier to get to most of the places. So to simplify it really quickly, a design system should be the solidification of guidelines and processes and user interface components and patterns that you want to repeat and reuse, that you want to keep consistent. You want, for instance, you want your code to be reviewed the same way every time by everyone, no matter who. Or you want your typographic scale that took you so long to craft to be used consistently across your website. And if you don't want it to be consistent, then that's fine, but maybe that means that it shouldn't be in the design system. If every single time that you need to create a new button on a page, a designer needs to design a new one, they will be wasting time that they could be spending writing better text for that form, or testing the form with users, or testing accessibility. And the developer who then has to go and build the new button every time, they could be spending their time making their form work faster, for example. So a design system frees your time to spend on things that really deserve that you spend time on, not things that have already been solved. So generally, if you're starting a project, or if you're working on a small project, you probably don't need to think about creating a really complex design system, but you may want to think about parts that will later become a design system. You may want to define the design principles for the project. When you have a good set of well-thought design principles, you can start making better decisions about how to design your product. For example, GDS, which is the UK's government digital service. So in simple terms, they're the team that is in charge of the government's digital products and the digital transformation. They have a set of principles, and one of them is do less. So number 2, over there. If someone else is, this means that if someone else is already doing something better than the government, they shouldn't redo it again. So if, let's say, they're thinking of creating a new page to explain something that another site already explains really well, maybe that new page can just be instead a link to the other site. And if they didn't have that design principle, then they may have wasted time creating something new, probably that was going to be worse than the one that already existed. You may also want to define things that are a bit more technical or concrete, specific, like how you're going to handle browser support. So GitHub say that they don't support Internet Explorer or on Windows XP. And how does this translate into their actual work? So maybe if someone submits an issue that something isn't working on that browser, they can then point to their browser support document and say, we're really sorry, but we're not going to fix that issue. We don't fix issues on IE on Windows XP. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of things that you can include in a design system and how you can start one. So I hope you can see the value of having one or starting one if you didn't already. So before I continue, I'm going to use the term design system throughout my talk, because it's just easier to keep to one name, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm referring to the complex design system in the truest sense of a name, with tone of voice and brand guidelines and pattern libraries like we just saw. But it's just easier to say design system and just keep to one name. So I hope that you can understand and forgive me for not being very strict. The title of this talk is Keeping Your Design System Alive. This is just a little anecdote, and it was inspired by something called the Tamagotchi, which was this cute little device in the late 90s. I don't know if anyone here is old enough to have had one. I had one. Okay, cool. So the Tamagotchi had a little animal inside that you had to look after and play with and feed to be kept alive and do lots of things with. But then I decided I wasn't going to continue with that analogy any further, because Tamagotchis actually ended up being really annoying and completely useless, and I hope that obviously your design system isn't that. So today I'm also not going to get into how you should create a design system. I'm going to assume that maybe you already have one or are in the process of creating one. My goal is to just give you some ideas on how you can make sure that once you do have one, it's maintained, how you can encourage people to use it, and participation from your team and from other teams. And I know it's not easy to get resources that you need to plan and to create a design system. It's really hard. You have to convince a lot of people. But I think that it's even harder once you do have one to make sure that you keep it alive. If you do want to talk about how to get to this point, how you can start, you can ask a question later, or you can try to grab me later as well. So before you do anything else, so number one, put someone in charge. Before you do anything else, make sure that there's someone leading this project. So you can call them a project lead, an evangelist, a champion, as long as it's clear that this person, or maybe two people, their responsibility is to keep the design system alive, and not just alive but also healthy. if you don't have someone that is responsible, even if you really, really want to maintain a design system in your work, it won't happen. Everyone's always very busy and has other things on their minds, and it's really incredibly easy for a project like this to go down and down on the priority list. Even though a design system can save teams loads of time in the future, people find it really hard to understand the need for this huge investment of time that is needed beforehand and also to maintain it. And finishing and delivering other stuff and finishing other projects just tends to sound more important. If you think that everyone's just going to pitch in and participate and drive this project, everyone together, you should rethink that. So this person will be there to make sure that the project is prioritized and that you're working towards the goals that you've defined for the project. Which leads me to my next point. So, my second tip, have a roadmap. It's important that everyone working on the project shares a common vision. So think about where you'd like to be in the next 3 months and in the next 6 months and in the year and so on. This shouldn't really be a view of day-to-day tasks or bug fixes or small things that you're working on. It's more of a high-level view of what you want to focus on next. And this applies to probably most projects. So to get things started, to create this roadmap, you can gather a few key people in the room, get everyone to write down in post-it notes what they think are key goals for your design system, so one goal in each post-it note. And they could be writing things like, I think we need to have a website, or have a Twitter account, or have a strong social media presence, or making sure that the design system is accessible, or we want 50% of the teams in the company to use it in the next 6 months, or we need to write better documentation, and so on. It can be anything. Once everyone is finished, you can then start, you should have a blank wall with nothing on it, and you start prioritizing those post-it notes. And you can maybe divide them into sprints, if that's how you work, or into months, or quarters, or releases, however works best, however you think will work best for you. So this here is the roadmap for the vanilla framework, the one that I was doing at Canonical. This is actually a public link. All of the links are in the end, so you don't have to write them down. And I can share the slides later. So when you have that prioritization finished, you can refer to it regularly when you're planning the work. And it will make it easier to decide what tasks you need to be doing next, what's the most important thing that you need to work on, and also what's less important, what's not going to get you to where you want to get to. And these goals can change, and these goals should change. So you also should put in place mechanisms like some regular meetings in your calendar that are going to guarantee that you don't forget to come and check if these make sense once in a while. 3, be open. If you're working on a design system, I assume that your ultimate goal is to get people to buy into it and to use it. I believe that this works better if you include people in your vision and share your plans and what's to come, and if you're transparent about how guidelines and how components are added to the system. When you're working really hard on a design system, and it's the same for anything that you're working really hard on, it can become hard to listen to negative feedback. But it's so important to become a better listener and really try to understand if when people are making suggestions or make comments, if there's really something that you need to improve on and something that you need to change, because they're probably the ones that are going to have to use this thing that you're building. What I mean is that it's important to accept other people's ideas and just not dismiss them straight away and think, oh, they don't know anything. So some more specific ideas on how you can be more open after you do the prioritization exercise that I talked before, you can share it with everyone. You can show it rather than just say, this is what we're doing now. You can say, we've done this, what do you think? Do you think that did we miss anything? And you get people's input, and you add more things to the list, and you change things. Something else, you can start using tools that are more inclusive. So in the project that I'm working on right now, we've just started using Figma instead of Sketch. So anyone on Linux, Mac or Windows, they can see our design files because it's a web-based app. It's actually free if you're just a single user. There's no need to have anything installed to see a file. Anyone can just go and leave a comment, and they can even, if one of the developers need to check something, they can just, this is just a quick sketch, quick wireframe. They can just go in and select each of the components, and they can see all of the properties on the side, and they don't have to install anything. Something else, have discussions in a place where other people can keep track of them, like GitHub. So again, the joint project that I'm working on right now, everything is available on GitHub publicly. But this doesn't mean that the project that we're going to be working on, they don't need to be public. But you can be open within a restricted number of people. You can be open just inside your company. So you can have on GitHub a private repository, but that is still open within everyone in your company. Also make time for discussion, like regular show and tells, or critiques about new components. Organize workshops to define and to name the new components, or you can have mini sprints so usually a sprint is 2 weeks, but you can have a mini sprint where maybe have 2 or 3 days where a group of people that don't normally work on this project can get together, and you can decide, oh, in these 2-3 days we're going to fix as many bugs as possible on a specific theme, like everything to do with typography we're going to fix, like if you have issues on GitHub, or everything to do with performance, we're going to be working on that. And this just means that people that are not familiar with the project, they can start to find where the code is. How are you supposed to write the documentation? How do you do design specs? Just being able to participate and to contribute, it works really well. And obviously, write about your work, no matter how early you think you are in your career. Either write it, if you can only write it internally, you can write it on mailing lists. Lots of companies have mailing lists, or possibly, if you can, just write it externally somewhere that you can share with more people, like a blog. If you're not the kind of person that is comfortable sharing work in progress, maybe you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone a little bit. It's very likely that even people that are not working directly on your design system are still going to be affected by it, and you want this to have a positive impact on their day-to-day work. You don't want it to be another annoyance, another obstacle, something that they have to deal with. You want it to be a positive thing. Tip number 4, define your contribution process. So for me, a design system is never finished. Styles change and new components are added and improvements need to be made to the code. So even if you're not accepting contributions from a wide community like some open source projects do, you might still want to think about defining the contribution process, even for people just within your team. So again, at Canonical, we did a diagram to define the thought process that should happen inside your head before you submit a new component. And once again, all of these links, this is all online and you can go and check later. So to get to this point, a small group got together again, and we sketched a flow diagram on a whiteboard, and we talked about it and we redid things, and when we thought we were finished, we presented it to just a slightly larger group of people that we knew were going to have a lot of feedback. And we got lots of feedback, and we revised the diagram, we changed things, we put things back, we just redid it. and then we shared it with everyone else in the team. So this didn't mean that now this process was set in stone. Just like the entire design system itself, all of these things that you're making, like the contribution process diagram or the roadmap before, everything is always evolving. The team that is working on the Joyent project right now is small, but even in this case we feel it's necessary to have some guidelines on how the design system can be expanded from the initial set of components. So we don't want people to just go into the code and add some new components without having some agreement from the rest of the team. We want to make sure that any new component that is added or any new guideline makes sense, not just to the very small set of people that works on it, and that it follows some rules to maintain consistency and high quality across the system. So going through this process of thinking how you want the system to expand usually brings up important conversations about the system's principles and values and the standards that you want to maintain, which is really important in keeping the consistency that you probably want from having a design system. 5, look after the documentation. Again, even if only just a small number of people are working with your design system, you want to define some parameters on how things should be used and how to put everything together into screens or into pages and something else, and also how to make proposals for new code or make changes. Documentation can be brand guidelines, style guides, browser support guidelines, accessibility guidelines, contribution guidelines, getting started documentation, coding standards, tone of voice, can be lots of things. In the way, all of these documents are your design system. So if you think that maintaining just the user interface components is hard, I think that maintaining good documentation is much, much harder. But they are really important to maintain the consistency and high standards that I'm sure you would want for a design system and for all of the sites that you build with the design system. So I don't really have any great insights on how to make people force them to write great documentation every time that they make a change, because I find this particularly hard. But something you might want to try is to have a column in your task board for documentation. So every issue that is being worked on needs to go through that step, and you make that step very visible. You could also consider adding documentation to the review process, to the code review process, so that no pull requests can go through if there isn't well-written, sensible documentation. Also, you can test your documentation just as you test your products. So usually people who write the documentation are people that are very close to the project and they know which components are in the library by heart, they know how it all fits together, and they know exactly what to do and what not to do. So it's important that you let people who are not as familiar use the docs to guide them through the design system and see where they lack detail and where they could be better. So maybe if you need to migrate a website to using the new design system, instead of the people that are normally working on the design system, if there's a design system team, not everyone has one, you can just try to get people from the other team to do it as well, together, and then they can provide feedback on the documentation. It works really well. So whatever you do, remember that your documentation needs to be clear and needs to be specific enough, but you also don't want it to be authoritarian or dogmatic, or you're just going to scare people out of contributing and out of improving your design system. Make things easy to find. All of these things that I've mentioned so far can be very easily spread all over the internet without a central location. If you expect people to follow all of these rules, then they should be really easy to find at the moment that they're working with the project or on the project. Everything should ideally be in one location, some kind of central hub. And this can be as simple as an internal wiki, or a dedicated website, or just a site made with GitHub pages, or maybe just the GitHub README file of your project. There's also several tools that let you create documentation easily, like KSS, Pattern Lab, Pattern Primer, Style Guide, Fractal, and there's many more that might be more aligned to your development stack. As long as everything is within reach from one location and it's very visible and very clear, so that you don't have people asking you all the time, oh, where the browser support documentation is, and you have to keep sending them the same link over and over. Or maybe people didn't go through the testing checklist because they didn't even know that there was one. So you don't want that to happen. You want everything to be very, very easy to find. Plan for maintenance. So a good design system, again, is never really done. You don't get to say, great, that project is now finished, it's released, let's do the next thing. New components are added, new guidelines, new technologies are going to have an impact. Maybe you want to add things, start adding things like animation, or you want to improve the performance, or you want to make it more accessible, or you want to improve the microcopy across all of your components, all the text, or maybe you need to start deprecating things that are not useful anymore, start removing things. It never ends. And knowing that all of these things that need to be done doesn't happen by magic. For example, to know that you need to add a new component, or to know that another team maybe is working on a new component and that will be useful to put in the design system, you need to talk to all these people. And these conversations don't just happen. I think the easiest way to make sure that they happen is to book time in people's calendar, so more meetings. At Canonical, we had what we called a working group meeting to discuss new component proposals and to answer questions and concerns and discuss ideas that didn't just have to do with the actual design. And this meeting happened every other week, so every 2 weeks. The entire design team, which included also front and back-end developers, everyone was invited to these meetings as optional guests. And the main team had to be there, obviously. The conversations could go from, oh, I think we need some more utility classes to deal with spacing better, or when I add a form into a row that has a dark background, the text color doesn't work. How can we fix that? Or we designed this new accordion pattern for this product and we think it should be added to the library. So how you revise all of these proposals and evaluate that something needs to be added or changed is up to you. But having this fixed time in everyone's calendar that is not cancelled at the last minute, even if some people can't be there, was really important for us, and it worked really well. Something else that we also did was we worked in 2-week sprints where we would have just normal epics, which is like themes that we're working on. A normal one could be like, we need to implement the new vertical spacing. But also every sprint we had an epic that was just called Scheduled Maintenance Works. And for those of you that don't know, in London there's this thing called a TfL, Transport for London, which is a little bit like, I think, Metro in Porto. And every weekend they have scheduled maintenance works, which just basically means some stations are going to be closed, some lines are going to be completely closed because we need to do maintenance. So that's where I got the name. So inside this epic, we could include just little things that didn't really have a specific theme. They're just small things that didn't fit anywhere else. And it also worked really well because it meant that we kept fixing little things that we could have otherwise just forgot about. So remember that even teams at very large companies that you may think they always do everything right, they know everything, even there people change their minds and they learn new things and they change the way that they do things midway through their projects and they have to redo everything again. So you should always expect that things are going to change, whether they're big changes or small changes. So this is going to be my last point. Learn from others. Our industry, what we're doing, is still quite young compared to others like graphic design or typography, or even yesterday we saw television, not to mention things like architecture or law or accounting. And we're all trying new things all the time that no one has tried before, and we're inventing new tools all the time, new processes, new rules, new technologies, and all of these things have an effect on our work. That's why I think it's so important and so interesting to learn about what other people are doing outside of the teams and the companies that I'm working with. And this is obviously relevant not just for the topic of design systems, but for everything else about our work. So just a few things that I try to keep up to date with, just so that you have an idea. So I'm usually on the Slack design channel for design systems. It's full of some of the people that are breaking ground in this area, like Brad Frost and Gina Ann, Nathan Curtis and Anna Debenham. And people just ask questions in the channel about what people are doing, and they share work in progress, and people join in the conversation, and it's really interesting. I also subscribe to a couple of design system related podcasts and newsletters, like the Design Systems Weekly newsletter and the Style Guides podcast, and I follow other podcasts and other people that aren't directly related to design systems but that are relevant to our area, like the Design Details podcast. They talk a lot about this subject, and Design Details is like an interview format podcast. They interview really interesting designers that are working in companies like Airbnb and Salesforce and things like that. And a lot of times these people are working on design systems, so it's a nice way to know about things. And also the Sidebar newsletter has good links to then explore. These days we can easily get very overwhelmed by the amount of information that we receive, so I find it easier to follow these more curated formats that I know are going to link me to important and relevant things, and then from there I can find out more on my own if I want to. The important thing is to keep learning and to compare experiences and to keep wanting to try new things, and also, very important, share your own experience with everyone else. So, summary: put someone in charge, have a roadmap, be open, define your contribution process, look after documentation, make things easy to find, plan maintenance, and learn from others. Vou agora voltar a falar português. O summary da minha apresentação é Design Systems, como vocês podem ver, dão imenso trabalho, mas também são muito interessantes e até podem ser divertidos. Eu espero que possam usar algumas destas ideias nos vossos projetos, e se quiserem fazer perguntas mais tarde, eu, como já disse, costumo estar no Slack Design Systems, se me quiserem contactar, e no Twitter. E já agora, se estiverem à procura de emprego e acharem que têm as qualidades necessárias, a minha empresa está a contratar designers em Londres e developers em Londres, em Lisboa e no Porto. E that's me.